Hey everyone, you're listening to the Simple Electronics Podcast. I'm your host, Dan from the Simple Electronics YouTube channel. This episode is brought to you by PCBWay, but more on that later. Because with me, I have a very special guest, Michael Laws from the Teaching Tech YouTube channel. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you for making a YouTube channel on a section of the internet that I really love, but I find very complex, which is the intricacies of 3D printing. So I really appreciate your channel for that part, at least.
Good, thanks very much.
So I know you. I've been watching you for a little while. So I know what you're all about. But for those listening who don't know who you are and haven't seen your YouTube channel, who are you and what do you do?
Okay, so the channel is called Teaching Tech, and the name came about because when I started it, I was a high school and primary school technology teacher. So it's a bit of a pun with that. Um, Basically, I always had a hobby of making things, in particular 3D printing. I got my first 3D printer for home back in 2013, and I was part of a community for the Solidoodle, which was the printer called Soliforum. And we just spent all our time trying to improve the printer in terms of firmware, printable parts like fan ducts, new carriages, all of that type of thing. So that's how I kind of became really immersed in 3D printing. And then when I became a high school teacher a few years after that, I was making videos for my school, basically tutorials for the kids to use. They were very low production quality. So you never saw my face, just my voiceover, probably in an echoey room, everything filmed in one take, kind of like a screencast of using CAD, things like that. SketchUp was my program of choice back then. And over time, that kind of steadily had some popular videos, and I think it got to like 1,700 subs or something like that without me ever trying or anything. So fast forward to maybe it's 2017, 2018. I was getting pretty frustrated in teaching. It's quite a rewarding but very challenging job. So I thought, okay, what would happen if I actually tried this properly? If I was dedicated to it, I tried to have some production quality. So I started teaching tech. The aim was for it to potentially grow enough that maybe I could do it part time. I could work 4 days a week as a teacher instead of 5 and just have that little bit of breathing space. But after 2 years, it had grown to the point where I was able to switch full time to doing YouTube, and it's continued to grow since then. So I've been very fortunate to be accepted by the community. And in many ways, there's lots of perks to this job. It's got its challenges too, but in many ways, it's a bit of a dream job. So yeah, it's great.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, sorry, is this your full-time gig now, or is
It
it?
is.
Okay, it is.
Yeah,
Excellent.
I timed it well. It became full time just before COVID, so the start of 2020. So I missed trying to teach through all of the lockdowns and all of those crazy challenges. So yeah, I was fortunate in my timing in terms of that.
Yeah, I got to teach during COVID because I was still a relatively new professor, only had a couple years experience at that point. And I was teaching a computer class to new, basically automotive students because all the garages here, they all use Windows computers. And a lot of people that have gone through sort of the education system, they were used to Chromebooks. So I had to teach Windows via Teams. And so there were challenges, trying to get them to even connect to the classroom in the first place while I was remote. That was a pain in the butt.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, I taught practical subjects as well, and I just don't know how I would have done it. So it sounds like you did really well.
Well, thank you. I did my best. Certainly I could have done better in person, but I mean, we had to do what we had to do.
Yep.
So you said SketchUp was your original CAD package of choice,
Hmm.
but I found that some of the best tutorials on the internet about using CAD are yours. And I always get the word wrong, but is it SolidWorks? It's the online one, Onshape.
Odd shape, yep. So
Yeah, got it.
SolidWorks is what I was taught at uni when I did industrial design back in the day. And Onshape is basically a web light version of that because some of the people that started it split from SolidWorks. So if you know SolidWorks, it's very easy to switch to. And the reason I used to do SketchUp and then switch to Onshape was because in the classroom at a school where kids bring their own device, which means some are Windows, like new and old, some are Mac, new and old. Half the kids don't have passwords to install software. You need something free, multi-platform, and ideally, if it's runs out of a browser without installation, that's fantastic. So that's why I switched to Onshape. But since it was close enough to SolidWorks, and that's what I first learnt on, I found it very comfortable, and I've continued to use it for my personal CAD.
Yeah, that's awesome. I happened to fall into I tried Fusion 360. I think it was because at the time Thomas I always mess up his last name, Sandlanderer. Is that
Mm-hmm.
the YouTuber? Anyways, he used Fusion for a little bit, and so
Mm-hmm.
I tried Fusion. And after trying and failing FreeCAD, I was just blown away by how Fusion works with my brain.
Mm-hmm.
Have you messed with Fusion? Do you like it at all?
I've played with it a little bit. The trouble for me is it's so simple and silly. Why I find it hard. There's two things. One, the camera commands for the mouse are different to what I'm used to, and I think they've updated it so you can change it. But I'm used to using the right mouse button to orbit the camera. So like click, hold it down, and then orbit the camera. But Fusion used to be that when you right clicked, a contextual menu would come up. That drove me insane. I think that's since been changed and you can configure it and personalize it how you want. The other thing is the history in Fusion goes horizontally in a ribbon across the bottom of the screen, whereas Onshape and SolidWorks, it goes vertically in a column down the left hand side of the screen. So there's the usual problems where, okay, I know I want to do a sketch and I'm trying to find the icons, but those two little things make it quite unfamiliar for me and I get frustrated.
Familiarity is important though, because I mean, speaking for me, but I think it applies to you. We're sort of self-employed when it comes to YouTube, so
Mm-hmm.
you need to be your own motivation to do work. And if your day looks like it's going to be you fighting with a CAD package all day, you're not going to want to do it. At least that's what happens with me. Is that the same with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Efficiency is everything. So, being comfortable with something and it being second nature, like you said, your day is spent designing the part, not struggling to get halfway through as much as you would if you were comfortable with the program.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And so, if someone were just getting started, would you recommend Onshape to that kind of person, or would you say they really need to try a few different CAD packages?
I would say for any type of software, the best solution is the one that clicks for them. So maybe they try Tinkercad and they're able to create anything they want straight out and they stick with it. Parametric CAD, based on the feedback I get in comments, a lot of people just really struggle with sketches, dimensions, and constraints. It's overwhelming for them. So that's going to be a hurdle they face with Fusion or Onshape or Inventor. They're all similar in that approach. So if they're absolutely sure they want to try parametric CAD, then I'd say, yeah, try a few, or maybe it's more a case of they find a series of tutorials from someone that does a pace and delivery style that works for them, and that makes the decision. Because you can model the same stuff in each of them. They generally have the same type of commands. It's just a matter of finding them and becoming familiar with the workflow.
Yep, that's very true. Um, except that for some reason, FreeCAD and we just, it doesn't work. Like I keep every 6 months, I give it a shot, and it's just, there's something about FreeCAD which I really want to like because it's entirely open source, but it's not clicking for me. I really want it to, but it doesn't. I don't know what it is.
I tried it maybe 5 years ago, and it was earlier in the development, and yeah, there was missing features and a few bugs. I haven't tried it since, just because I haven't had the need. But like you, ideally, I'd like to support the open source option, but it would mean a big change. So it's not really efficient for me to do so for no other reason other than that.
Yeah, that's very true. And in fact, since I love giving advice to newcomers to hobbies, because I don't like the idea of gatekeeping. I'm more of a, gates open, come in kind of guy.
Yep.
Over the years of you working in and around different 3D printers, do you have any words of wisdom to share with someone that's looking for a 3D printer today?
Sure. Okay. So most people need to understand with 3D printers is that for the majority of them, it's going to require a level of tinkering. And that doesn't really come across from the ads you see on 3D printer manufacturer websites. So you need to invest a certain amount of time and energy into learning how to problem solve. And for most 3D printer manufacturers, they don't really have many resources. And that's part of the reason I've been able to build my channel the way I have, because people like myself and the other creators are picking up the slack of the manufacturers to make guides and tutorials and troubleshooting resources to help those people out. So, first thing, go in not expecting to master it, expecting it to be a journey and picking up skills and knowledge as you go from inevitable failures. Probably the second thing is there's good printers and there's bad printers, but it's not like there's only one good brand of printers. So again, the best solution is the one that works for them. They might particularly like a certain brand for whatever reason, and they shouldn't be swayed by other people being so desperate to get them to like their favorite as well. Like you're saying with gatekeeping, like it'd be ridiculous to say, oh, there's no point 3D printing unless you buy printer X or printer Y. There's multiple ways to success. So then to be open minded, again, explore different options and see what works best for them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, when someone's asking me for advice, because it does happen a lot, I do face sort of newcomers to the hobby because I may have, you know, three machines over my left shoulder, but they're all like my machines personally are all junk, and I love sharing the experience I have with my printers for other people. So when people ask me, I say, well, if you're on a tight budget, I just say Ender 3 V2. It's a great machine, and the reason why I recommend it is because so many people have it that you can probably find your problem in any forum on the internet. And if you want fewer problems, I recommended the Prusa Mark III because I think that's about as close as you can get to a sort of hands-free get started type experience
Mm-hmm.
without spending a ton of money. Do you have any refinements on those recommendations, or do they sound about right to you?
No, I think they're right. As long as the Ender 3 person knows that, yeah, they might have some issues. I mean, I had my own Prusa Mark III for home and I set one up at my school and they were both fantastic. I had a Prusa Mini that I was an early adopter of that had some teething issues, but Prusa's online, you know, they got 24/7 live web chat and whatever else. So the few times I've used that, that was great. So definitely more of a safety net for that. I think Bamboo Lab have built a pretty good reputation. Um, I suppose the best way you can know that they're actually living up to the hype is when people that run print farms start to get rid of their other printers and get Bamboo Lab printers instead. Because, like, at the end of the day, like, the money talks with that, and people aren't going to invest in multiple printers unless they're fast and reliable. So, yeah, I would be happy to recommend that type of printer as well.
So in your lab, I mean, I'm just looking through your videos,
Mm-hmm.
and you've tested quite a few printers. How many printers do you have left out of all those?
Um, Maybe 15 or something. There's a few always aside, not doing much, ready to be like I'm looking for a chance to give it away to a friend or a school. Just so I actually just gave away my Prusa Mark III recently because I used to use it dedicated PTG, but then I got another printer with a bigger build volume. It was actually the Bamboo Lab P1P. So the inbuilt profiles for that were just really clean in terms of stringing. So just like no brainer for me to make that my dedicated PTG printer. So the Prusa was sitting there and I actually gave it to my next door neighbor because they've been amazing neighbors so far since we've lived in this current house for a year. And he expressed interest getting into it. And I thought, okay, well, this is something I can donate that is going to look after him as much as he looks after it. And as far as I know, he's had a good time with it so far. So um, yeah. But how many do I have? I probably use about six or seven at any one time. They're generally purposed or modified for different specialties. So I've got one really large printer with a large nozzle to do big stuff fast. It doesn't necessarily need to look pretty. I've got a couple just set up for general PLA. I've got one set up just for TPU, one set up just for PTG. Um, I've got my conveyor belt, one that I built in case I need to run 50 of something overnight, and it'll eject itself and start the next one by itself. I've got a really large delta if I ever need something tall and cylindrical. How many are actually around the house between resin printers, the one I use, the and the ones lying about? Maybe like somewhere between 50 to 20.
Oh boy, that's a lot. My big question here was, since you have access to all kinds of makes and models, which one is whirring away the most? Like, if I were to pick a random day of the week and say, Michael, which machine are you using? Which one are you the most likely to be using?
Okay, so I print 95% PLA. So that would be the Rat Rig V Core 3 or the Second SK Tank. They're two premium Core XYs, Voron style, that I built up myself. So I've probably got some emotional attachment to them because of that. And they're really fast, reliable. I know them inside out because I did build them myself and set up the firmware and all of that. So they're the most likely to be whirring away making whatever my current project is. If I was printing something that needed a bit more temperature resistant, like PTG, it would be Bamboo Lab P1P. Anything that's like nylon or ASA, that would be Bamboo Lab X1C. And anything in flexible would be Ender 3 because it's got a specific Omnia drop hot end set up for that. But probably, yeah, the two Core XY kit printers would be running the most on average.
I've been dreaming of building a Voron 2.4, but it's just I started on this project a couple of years ago, and I'll forgive any listeners who don't know that I'm on the project because I mostly talk about it. I need to make a video about it, but I'm building my own Core XY from scratch, my own design and everything. And I want to. Voron came out after that. The Voron sort of became popular after I already ordered my parts and made the design. And so now I'm having kind of buyer's remorse. I wish I would have just, waited and bought a Voron. But at some point, I think when I put mine together and if it actually does work, I think I might have some pride, in designing my
Mm-hmm.
own stuff. So we'll see about that. But yeah, I do think something like a Rat Rig or a Voron would be just amazing to watch go. Because I mean, some of those things, I mean, they print really fast and they're very technologically advanced, sort of like cutting
Yep.
edge and all open source stuff. It's fun to see.
Yeah, it's they are enjoyable to build. Assuming you like tinkering, then they're like a fantastic project for someone. Anyone technically inclined that wants to be creative in making the printer and then making things with it afterwards. I can't recommend enough building up any of those kits.
Do you have any notable upgrades that you would recommend to, let's say, the buyers of the Mark III Prusa and the Ender 3 V2 that we were recommending a little earlier? Do you have any sort of recommendations for them once they're already settled in and ready to upgrade?
Um, a lot of my focus is on practicality, like convenience and reliability. I like to send a print wirelessly and not even go and look at the printer and just know that I come back a couple of hours later, it's going to be sitting reliably finished. So, with that in mind, auto bed leveling for the Ender 3 V2. I don't know, did Creality have that as a factory option now, or you still have to do it as a modification?
I actually don't know because they do have their own touch probe.
Mm,
So I'm not
yeah.
sure if the V2 comes with it. I'll just look it up while you're chatting here real quick.
So I would say that absolutely auto bed leveling. I know a lot of people take pride in being able to manually level or trim the bed, and then they're cautious getting the part off and they don't have to touch it for a long time. That's fine, but for most people, they just want it to work without investing any particular effort. So auto bed leveling makes that possible. The other thing, probably a magnetic removable bed, just to get parts off easily. Both of these things were missing for the vast majority of the years I was 3D printing until just before I started teaching tech. So I certainly appreciate how convenient and the quality of life they bring.
So I'm just looking. It looks like the Ender 3 V2 does not have it, but the Ender 3 V2 Neo has the auto bed leveling.
Sure. Okay.
So yeah, I think you have to go up a little bit. I honestly think Creality made a mistake diversifying. I think it was nice when all the machines were the same. Um, then it's one set of tooling, one set of instructions, one set of everything. I feel like trying to accommodate everybody was a mistake. They should have just went, the Ender 4 and put all their upgrades together on a single machine instead of going like
Mm.
Ender 3, V2 Pro, then there's like S3 or something. I'm not sure.
They've got way too many printers, I would say. Just way too many printers. Just if you're wanting to buy a 3D printer and someone says, look up Creality, and you go to their website, probably going to be swamped. You won't know where to start. There's just so many.
I agree. Do you still find like fun in 3D printing, or is it kind of like become more of a job now? Because I know that I love tinkering with things, but sometimes having to get it on camera is the least fun part of it.
Yep, I absolutely know what you're talking about. So sometimes it's fun to do a project where I don't have to film it. It's like a little bit liberating because it slows it down and you got to be thinking, okay, what shot do I need of this for it to be clear? Do I need to demonstrate this first by some other way so the concept is understood? So that definitely is one of the downsides. Sometimes you just want to finish whatever project and not have to worry about it. However, overall, absolutely still love it. I've always loved designing and making things. Like I don't know about yourself, but as a kid, did you play with Lego and just love inventing and iterating and building working mechanisms and that type of thing?
100%.
Yep. I see 3D printing as that for not just grown-ups, but for anyone these days. You have an idea, you can realize it. Like the means are different to building Lego blocks, but the concept is absolutely there. That's
Oh,
the part I find so rewarding.
yeah, very true. Actually, I do have a massive sense of satisfaction when I build something in, let's say, Fusion 360, and then I print it, and then I bring it over to the part I made to hold or whatever.
Hmm.
And when it just slides on perfectly with that perfect interference fit, it's just so satisfying.
Yep, absolutely. That's people won't really understand the pleasure in designing a simple bracket, just something really boring that doesn't exist, but you design it, you make it, and then it fits perfectly. And you can walk past that bracket or mount every day if it's something in your house. It just makes you smile every time. It's so satisfying to do.
100%. And a friend of mine and fellow YouTuber, another maker, he was asking me like, how am I going to hold this, this PCB down for a production environment? And it's impossible because there's no mounting holes and whatever. And I'm like, well, here, I'll make you a draft. So I just designed something in Fusion with the measurements he got from just vernier calipers, and I emailed it to him, and then he printed it. And it's incredible that I designed something, let's say late on a Friday night, and by Saturday morning when I woke up, I had a picture of the board sitting in this mount I made. And he said, it's perfect, thanks. It's incredible how, I mean, I've never even met this guy in person, and I designed a part for him. It's a crazy feeling.
Yeah, it's fantastic. That community aspect again, like we were talking about with making mods, but also just making parts. I find most hobbies I have can be made better with 3D printing and other manufacturing methods that we can do at home, whether it's printing accessories or holders or modifications. It just makes things, yeah, more enjoyable.
Here's something that I struggle with, and I'm just going to put you on the spot here and see if you have any advice for me personally.
Hmm.
So, one thing I do struggle with is tolerance, or I guess clearance
Sure.
tolerance.
Yep.
I'm looking for the word, but anyways, I have these lithium cells that I've just designed holders for, and I designed them, with my usual. I think I do zero point 0.1 mil on both sides of
Hmm.
tolerance, and this time it just wasn't enough because the part is so big. I think it doesn't make enough difference. Do you have like a rule of thumb for, adding clearance to your designs?
I do. So either point 0.1 or point 0.2, depending on what it is. Um, Especially for holes, like point 0.4 oversized for any hole that like a screw needs to go through, or if it's going to be a board that I'm going to thread in the bolt and cut the thread into the plastic the first time, point 0.4 again. So for instance, an M3 bolt, I'll make the hole 2.9, so it prints about 2.5, and that's perfect. If it's something, say it's a really long, complicated part, and I'm worried that the clearance will be off, I'll try and print just like it's hard to explain, like a footprint version of it, a couple of meters thick, so I can test the fit. So I'm not sure in your case with the cells whether you could take a slice through the middle where the cells are held and print like a 2 millimeter tall version of that. So then you can take it off the bed and hold the cell up against it and see whether it's any good or not.
Yeah, I definitely could do that. And just for our viewers in America, Liberia, and Myanmar, Michael said zero point 0.4. He means zero point 0.4 millimeters. If you put zero point 0.4 inches of clearance, you're in trouble.
Absolutely. Yep.
Well, excellent. I'm going to put that in. So 0. See, this time 0.1 wasn't enough. It is possible that I just I had a measurement error because it's an aluminum box, right? These are the prismatic cells, and they have heat shrink around them, and they have a sticker on the bottom. So it might be that I didn't measure it right. But yeah, twice now it came off the printer too tight. So I'm gonna have to go drastic next time.
It's frustrating when that happens, particularly if it's a long print and everything else is perfect. Sometimes I'll just get out a Dremel tool and grind a little bit if that's viable. And
Yeah, in this
I'll
case,
change the CAD in case I need to print it again. I want it to be perfect. But yeah, I'll just make the changes on the part.
yeah, in this case, I'm gonna run it. I'm gonna run a file over them because they're 5-hour prints,
Yep.
each of them, and I need like 4 or 5 to finish this project,
Mm-hmm.
and so I'm not gonna waste. I'm gonna clean them up, and it's gonna be on the inside. No one's gonna see it.
Yep. Fair enough.
All right, so this brings me to a part which I'm pretty excited to talk about because I found your channel because you exist sort of like in the middle of two of my hobbies or two of the things I know well. So 3D
Mhm.
printing and cars. Because the first video I watched on your channel, I didn't even remember which car it was because it was a few years ago. You printed like an air intake for your car, and I actually remember you doing the typical YouTuber thing, trying to head off the comments that people are going to say was going to melt or something, and you had already tested that it wouldn't. But you made an air intake for your car. Can you talk to us a little bit about your sort of like your love for cars and how 3D printing sort of got involved with that? Just a quick interruption to talk about this episode's sponsor, PCBWay. PCBWay has been a long-term sponsor of the channel, and I think they're a good match for my channel because they provide quality PCBs for a reasonable price. You can get boards manufactured up to 100 mils by 100 mils for just $5, including shipping to Canada, $15 US, including shipping to USA, $12 US, which is incredibly cheap for professionally manufactured PCBs. I can personally attest to the quality of these PCBs, and so if you want a circuit immortalized forever, check out PCBWay.com with the link in the description. Now back to the conversation.
Sure. Okay, so I've loved cars as long as I can remember. I think it started early in primary school. My family moved from Sydney to the Blue Mountains, where I still live now. That's about 2 hours out of Sydney. But for half a year, we used to commute a couple of hours each way, morning and night back. So I spent a lot of time looking at the car window, looking at other cars on the freeway. And I think that's when it really kicked in. Like I had Matchbox cars and whatever when I was younger, but that's when I really started to pay attention to cars. I've always, as I got older through high school and everything, I got more into motorsport. Always loved modifying cars. Used to spend time in study periods at high school looking in the Trading Post, which was a paper only newspaper back then where people would sell modified cars and things of that nature, and go, oh, here's this type of car with this mod, is it good value, that type of thing. So I've always been immersed in that type of culture. From as old as I could afford it, I've like my daily drivers were my modified cars. I always love tinkering with them and playing with them. And when I was young and poor, that was problematic sometimes because maybe something will go wrong, and then I'm like, how am I going to get to work? But you're young and got all the time in the world, maybe not that much money, but you can solve these problems with enthusiasm, just about. Um, and then I had a period, maybe through my late 20s to mid 30s, where I only had sensible, normal cars for getting to work. I stopped playing with modified cars. I was still into motorsport, particularly F1, following that, but I stopped having project cars and things. And then I think it was 2016, I bought that Nissan 180SX again as another project car. I kind of felt like I'd reached the age where when I was late teens, I would look at those people and be like, oh, they've got this hobby, but it's not their only car, and they've got money to actually do things to it properly. I'd reached that part where I'd been, working as a teacher for a while. I'd build up enough expendable income to buy a project car and have it be a project car instead of it being my daily driver as well. And over the years, I slowly modified it, fixed it up, did a few track days, drift, skid pan days, drag racing, things like that. Still watching Formula One. Um, Actually, I'm obsessed with Formula One to the point where I've named two dogs after Australian F1 drivers. So Webber, who's passed now, but we had him for like 12, 13 years. And now we have a dog called Ricardo, who's only 3 years old. So he's hopefully got a long way to go.
I'm just
But
going to interrupt you here because I'm a dog guy. So what kind of dogs were they, just before we move on?
Sure. So Weber was a black Labrador,
Oh, that's
and
awesome.
now we got sick of the shedding hair in the house. So now we have miniature schnauzers. So completely different type of dog, like little teddy bear, cuddly dogs, but we love them all the same.
I love dogs. So yeah, especially
Yeah, me too.
the bigger breeds. I'm a
Mhm.
big fan. So the black lab, I would have if we would have met in person, I wouldn't have stopped petting Weber. Basically,
Yeah, he was very friendly, and Ricardo is as well. They're both the type to go up to a stranger and not jump all over them, but kind of come up wagging their tail with big brown eyes, looking up like, "Oh, will you pat me? I'll love you in return." Just that real loyal type of friendly dog.
gotta love dogs. Sorry,
Yep.
you were talking about F1 then.
Yeah. Um, so I had my 180SX. It was actually the fourth one of them I've had, so I know that type of car inside and out. So for anyone into Japanese cars, it's an S13 chassis, and this one was a 180SX with a Sylvia front because the S13 was made with two body styles, but all the engine and the rest of the body underneath was the same. So basically, start with one and then swap the outer body panels to the other on the front, and then that's called a Sil 80, being a mix of a Sylvia and a 180SX. And that was immortalized in Japanese car culture in an anime called Initial D, where one of the main rivals was in a Sil 80. So yeah, I love that car. It was really cool. But I found they're becoming rarer. It was appreciating in value. When I had my first ones back, in the early 2000s, they were like the everyman cheap drift car. There were so many of them around. They were so affordable. But enough time had passed that people were starting to crash them, and they're getting rare, and they were appreciating in value because of that. Parts were getting rarer to find. So in combination of that and the fact that I had paid for things like a respray, I was getting more and more reluctant to actually take it on the track. So the last few years, I would drive it less than 100 kilometers a year. I'd take it out once or twice a year. That's it. It would just sit in the garage doing nothing, but I'd be paying insurance and registration for it. So yeah, I figured time to get rid of it, which I did recently.
I mean, those Japanese boxes, they became investment vehicles under everyone's noses. Like, since high school, I've dreamed of having a Honda CRX. As a car guy, you probably know what that
Yep.
is, but everyone else, it's a small two-door. For us Japanese fanboys, probably it's a bit of a sports car, but it is an econo box masquerading as a sports car.
Hmm.
But I bought one in 2012 when one got traded to the dealership where I worked. The guy said the engine was blown, and I just saw it like from the garage door out into the back lot. Like it was probably a good 200 meters, something like 600 feet away from me, and it looked in rough shape. So I just went up to the front, and the salesperson said, "Yeah, the guy traded in, said it needs an engine and whatever." I was like, "Whatever, I'll buy the shell."
Mm-hmm.
So I paid $400 for this thing, and waiting for the tow truck, I started noticing like, well, the outside was dirty, but if you cleaned it off, like the paint was all perfect. I popped the hood, and all of the bolts, all of the nuts and bolts still had their gold, their cadmium plating on them. So it gave a little bit of a gold luster to original bolts. And I finally looked at the odometer, and it had 43,000 miles, because it's an American car. So about, I don't know, 60 some thousand kilometers.
Yep.
And just waiting for the tow truck, I got it started, and I was like, oh, screw this. I put the dealer plate on it and I drove it home. But for $400 back in 2012, and these days, I could probably get somewhere around $20,000 or $30,000 to the right seller. And like, it's just been sitting in my garage because I haven't had the money to put it on the road. I mean, because I'd want to insure it and everything and get it appraised for its actual value. So it's ridiculous. Like, nobody expected these Japanese boxes to appreciate like that, but they did. Here we
Yeah,
are.
that's it. I guess they were popular enough that a lot of people liked them. So now that they become rarer, I guess there's a market for it. And those people become older and in most cases will have more income over time. So yeah, creates the conditions. I mean, I'm not sure about where you live, but during all the lockdowns during COVID, the market for things like this just exploded. The prices went up so much. I think everyone was stuck and bored and looking for hobbies. So I probably could have got 4 times what I paid for mine during that stage. And when I sold it last year, the market had dropped a lot, but I still got more than double what I paid for it.
Oh yeah, and I think in your case too, specifically, I think for motorsports fanatics, there aren't many replacement for a relatively long wheelbase rear wheel drive Japanese car.
Yep.
So that helps the rarity, because here we never got we got the 240s, or the 180s and the
Mm-hmm.
240s, but they were very uncommon here in North America. And
Yep.
so really, if you're looking for a rear-wheel drive car, you're probably looking at a Miata,
Mm-hmm.
and Miata is quite short wheelbase. It's not a great drift car. Supras are unfindable.
Mm.
S2000s are unfindable. So there's really not much that can take the place of that Nissan. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that's part of why it's valuable as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Like they were so popular for a reason, just in terms of bang for your buck. Like the Japanese version, like small, light, turbocharged engine, rear-wheel drive, factory LSD. Yeah, wheelbase about right. Lots like huge aftermarket choice of parts. Just perfect storm.
So then, at what point did you look at your project car and think, you know what would go well here? A 3D printed intake.
Okay, so I know it's different in various countries, and when I made the video you were talking about, people in Germany were saying, "Oh, you think you've got it hard here. It's so strict to modify a car where we live." And but in Australia, it's fairly strict. I think stricter than North America. Um, so you could get pulled over, and then the police could go through your car looking for defects. And one of the ones that's like an automatic one is a pod filter, which is what came on that car when I got it. So other things I look for, loud exhaust. I changed that. I got a Varex one, which is like an electronic butterfly flap. So you had a wireless controller for that. You could open and shut it. So it wasn't much louder than a regular car, but if I was doing a track day, open it up, full power. It was too low. It had coilovers, so I raised the height. So the pod filter air intake was like the last thing left on the car that was like police magnet if I did get pulled over and they wanted to give me a bad day. So I figured, why not? This car's modified. I'm not going to find anything off the shelf. So why don't I 3D print it? Like I've got a big enough printer to do it. It'd be a fun project. So yeah, it seemed to make sense, and I went with it.
And what did you learn that you can maybe pass on to anybody listening? I mean, they should go watch the video, but what's the learning here?
Okay, so first thing, material, like a technical specific thing. So you do need a filament that you print from that will withstand the temperature of an engine bay. And something like ABS is great for that. It's not going to melt or even soften until over 100 degrees Celsius. And over in the corner of the engine bay, not next to the exhaust or anything, it's not going to get any hotter than that. In fact, what I found frustrating, like you were saying, people say, "Oh, it won't work because it's 3D printed." If you look, there's other plastic components in an engine bay already. So why would the ones from the manufacturer not melt, but the ones you make melt? when they're essentially the same plastic. So if you look at what plastics they are, you can replicate that. There's no reason you can't, and that's what was proven in the end. Um, but yeah, back to the technical point, ABS is a popular choice, but it's hard to print because it warps. However, I used ASA, Apollo X, which was like a specific version of ASA. So that's easier to print large objects without them warping and splitting. I had a few minor splits, but overall it was sound. And yeah, just that idea that don't let don't have a misconception that you can't make parts for these functional environments yourself. Like I said, if there's already plastic in the engine bay, then why can't you add your own plastic to it? As long as you design it to suit the demands of 3D printing and understand the limitations and strengths, then why not? And so it was proven. I had that on the car for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years without any issues at all. It never deteriorated. There was never any problem. So yeah, go for it.
Did you sell the car with that print still on it?
I did. Yes, I did.
Oh,
I
there
mean,
we
it's
go.
it's very easy to change back to a pod filter if someone wanted, but I don't know why they would bother.
It's even better in this case because the previous seller, you probably, gave them the 3D print files on top of that so they can 3D print some more.
I'm not sure. I didn't talk to them if they owned a 3D printer or not. They did. They
Oh,
didn't. They didn't recognize me. I think I've only ever been recognized twice ever in real life, which is perfectly fine with me. Um, yeah, so I'm not sure, but if he can get in touch if he needs to. If there's a problem with it, I could print another one if it came down to it. If they didn't have a big enough printer, that's not a problem. I suppose that's one of the other take home from the whole process compared to buying something off the shelf. And you probably know yourself, a lot of bolt on in inverted comma kits for cars aren't actually bolt on. Like they're
nope.
90% of the way there, but something doesn't fit, something fails. When you're making it yourself, you're in complete control. You can iterate and then print it again until it is perfect. So big advantage.
Absolutely. I mean, I worked at a Honda dealership for, I guess most of my career, 16 years out of the 17. And I'll tell you, aftermarket parts usually fit like junk. You need to massage them in a little bit. And even worse is when you're talking about project cars or modified cars, they typically have a whole bunch of aftermarket parts stacked in the engine bay. And so if you need to install, two different aftermarket parts for that do two different things, you may find that all of a sudden the airbox where the new one is supposed to fit is now being obstructed by a blow-off valve or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Compatibility is not thought about,
Yeah.
between different manufacturers. So 3D printing is the perfect example for this.
Hmm.
And I just want to back you up in your statement that there is plastic in the engine bay. Today, let's say for the last 10 years, it's hard to find a car with an intake manifold that's made out of metal. Typically, they're made out of nylon these days.
Yep.
But in the last 5 years, it's hard to find an engine cover, like a valve cover, that's actually made out of metal. Now they're also made out of nylon. So again, just like you said, if the manufacturers are doing it, why can't you, right? Of course, they're like fiber reinforced, but hell, you can print fiber reinforced stuff these days too.
Absolutely. You could 3D print a skin and then bond your own carbon fiber or fiberglass over that if you're worried, or add a heat shielding material. As long as you understand 3D printing and you orient your print the correct way for maximum strength for that particular shape, then why not?
Absolutely. And what excites me too is that 3D printing doesn't have to be the end product. I have this dream of building a few custom parts for my current Volvo,
Hmm.
but using a 3D print as a negative mold and then laying carbon fiber weave into it
Hmm.
and then separating it with a mold release. I mean, the opportunities are endless because you're just basically creating a, whatever shape you want. And even if your 3D printer is tiny, like those Prusa Minis, you can tile your design and print it, print 100 tiles and glue them together and smooth out the surface. I mean, possibilities are endless.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, that's something I've been looking into a lot myself recently. So I'm desperate to build something from carbon fiber. I've bought fiber tube or flat sheet and then machined 2D profiles, but I'd like to mold something from carbon fiber. So I can recommend a channel. They're a manufacturer that sells composite materials, but they have excellent tutorials. They're called Easy Composites. They're from the UK and they ship all over the world. And they've got multi-part, step-by-step videos on exactly what you said. So 3D printing a mold and then different ways to lay up. Like they'll have one on pre-preg, one on resin infusion, um, or maybe 3D printing to then fiberglassing over the top to create a mold that can go in the oven. So I'd recommend looking up them. And also on the other thing you said about tiling the design, back in the early days when I had my Solid Doodle 2, there was a guy on our forum that was making a replica Aston Martin. And he did exactly that. He wanted to make a fiberglass mold to do all the body work. And the Solid Doodle had a build volume of 150 millimeters cubed. He basically turned the whole body into voxels of 150 by 150, and he printed everything in pieces and built up the whole outside of the car from 3D prints, stuck them all together, and then took the mold off from that.
That is incredible. I wish I had the amount of space to do that. And for everyone in the US, Liberia, and Myanmar, that's under 6 inches in every direction, the
Yep.
build volume. It's tiny.
I
That
believe
is
he still
incredible.
has a website. Yeah, if you just Google Solidoodle Aston Martin, you'll the first images that come up will be of him building this up, and you can see in those images everything looks like there's a grid on the surface, and that's the 150 millimeter print by print section.
Oh, that is awesome. Yeah, I'm gonna put it in the show notes so that people listening along can check that out, because he did it a little bit in the same way that it, well, anyways, it looks like it's printed like all these ribs, a little bit like how people do boat molds.
Mm-hmm.
That is really cool.
And
Wow.
that was a long time ago, so I'm pretty sure it's all finished now. But yeah, we marveled at that when he posted on our forum way back in the day.
What's exciting to me too is that some people are so good at designing, at doing CAD work, and that you get almost 100% faithful recreations of, like, let's say, like a Honda Civic Type R, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And it's meant to print on a 3D printer and just sit on your shelf, but there is nothing stopping you from scaling that unlimited, right? You might end up running out of resolution where it's going to look a little blocky, but if you're yourself good at modeling, you can go in and smooth those edges out. The amount of possibilities with the community, the 3D printing community, is
Mm-hmm.
endless. This is what I love about it.
I mean, yeah, if you add 3D scanning to that, which doesn't have to cost anything, you can use photogrammetry and use like an open source software to put all your photos together and make the 3D part. So, you add that to the toolbox as well. And yeah, like you say, the sky's the limit.
So you actually have, in your motorsport sort of hobby,
Mm-hmm.
you've reached quite an important point. One point that I'm quite jealous of, a major milestone. Do you care to share it with us right now?
Sure. So when I sold the other car, it was not just because I wasn't using it, and it was, as much as I liked looking at it sitting there in the garage, it was to replace it with something that I would use. So when was it? About halfway, maybe late last year, 2022, I put it up on the market, and then in Australia, interest rates and everything kept on going up recently, and so it was hard to sell. I had to drop the price a few times, and it took a few months, but I eventually sold it. And then since then, I've purchased myself a race car, which I've started a second channel called TT Racing to document my journey with.
Can you explain to us? This race car looks insane, by the way, and I do recommend everyone listening go over to Michael's second channel, linked in the description or the show notes, and check out the video yourself. But can you give us a brief overview of what this race car is?
Sure. So it's a Speeds, which is spelled SPEADS, not as in the word speed, double E, RM11. And the chassis is meant to be Formula 1000. And that's a category of wings and slick, small open wheeler race cars designed to have 1000cc motorbike engines and gearboxes. So that's the way it was designed. This particular company in South Africa for Formula 1000, there was manufacturers all around the world that were making various kits for people to go racing with. My one was built by people in Australia, and instead of a 1,000cc engine, they put in a Suzuki Hayabusa. I think it's 1340cc engine and gearbox. So it looks like, what would I say? It looks like an F1 car from the late 90s, early 2000s, and it's around 90% of the size of that as well. So if you want to compare it, if you look up a Ferrari F 2004, which is one of the last V10 era cars, it looks like a mini version of that. Not quite as nice proportions, but very similar to that. So it's very slightly undercut side pods, like twin element front wing, twin element rear wing, just the general profile, pretty much the same as that, except really small and light, motorbike engine and gearbox.
Now, have you had it out on the track yet?
I have not. I was very impatient waiting to sell the other car and researching what I wanted to buy for this one. But since I've got it, which is maybe 2, 3 months, I've been very patient with it. In part, having to set up all the things associated with the second channel. And maybe people don't think about that, but just like agonizing over a logo that went on for about a week and a half. I don't know how many variations I had that I was showing to my friends and getting feedback, but eventually settled on a logo. Then I have to plan and film the intro sequence, like the outro bits, set up all the channel on YouTube, make the graphics for that. So all of that, as boring as it is, took up some time. And then because the car was built in 2012, in race cars, a lot of the safety components are dated. They only last so long before you're not allowed to use them anymore. So there's several parts of the car that I'm currently working to bring up to date so I can do track days. So things like the fire system is out of date. It's got an electronic system where if there's a fire, you press a button and it fills the engine bay full of this. I'm not sure if it's foam or something like that, but anyway, it puts out the fire. Things like the harnesses, they're out of date as well. So I had to buy new harnesses and fit and adapt them to the car. And then I just need to patch up a few bits of bodywork from wear and tear. What else? I've got to service it, just make sure there's no loose nuts and bolts, all of that type of thing. So hopefully not too far away from taking it to the track for the first time. But yeah, I've had to be patient and fix up all of that.
Be honest, how much of the gift of the Mark III to your neighbor was to apologize for the exhaust noises he's going to be hearing in the upcoming weeks?
Okay, I've only started it less than 5 times, partly for that reason. I never wanted to be in any house one of those neighbors that's like making really loud noise nonstop. But it's close to that because we have pet miniature goats in the backyard, and for a while they were really noisy, and the neighbors were incredibly patient and kind with that. So I did feel that was a fair gift to give in return.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough. To be honest, though, like I would much rather my neighbors have goats because all my neighbors have are basically outdoor cats,
Hmm.
and we moved here because we love the songbird population, and
Hmm.
they've been decimated by the cats. So
Yep.
I would much prefer our neighbors just had goats instead.
Yep. I mean, as dog people, like they've killed our pet chickens and things before, but a fence will solve that. Whereas it's a lot harder to keep a cat in.
Oh yeah, yeah, we blocked the holes and they just jumped the fence.
Yep.
Stupid cats. Um, I so how long until we see some 3D printed stuff on the race car? Now, I'm not talking about lower control arms and carbon pregnated rims or anything like that, but
Mhm.
like you are making a YouTube channel, so are we going to see like camera mounts? Are we going to see gauge pods, stuff like that?
Sure. Well, quite literally this week, the video for teaching tech is on making parts for the race car. It's like a crossover video. I'm mainly machining parts, but there will be some 3D printed little bits here and there. So a camera mount is one of the things. I've got a 360 camera to sit on top of just above the roll hoop, so the top middle of the car. And I want a quick release mount just because obviously I don't, when the car's being transported to the track, if it's wet, you don't want your camera sitting there. And also probably for theft reasons, I can just go put it on before I take it on track, hit record, and I'm off. So yeah, a custom quick release mount, and I think the base of that will be machined aluminium, but I'd like it to be a bit more aerodynamic. So there's a good chance part of it will be 3D printed just to streamline it a bit.
It makes sense for a quick release too. So when you drive your one seat open wheel car to the shops, and then you get out to do your weekly shopping, then you can take your camera with you and then put it back on the roof after.
Well, I would like to test it, and some friends have said to me, why don't you just take it on the road?" I think it's too low, and because I live in the mountains, there's a lot of hills around, so the transitions onto those hills, a good chance I'm going to get stuck anyway if I tried to sneak it. But maybe to test the camera, I'll put the car on the trailer and go for a drive, and that'll give me an idea of how it looks.
Or have one of your friends drive so you can sit in the car on the trailer to get the feeling.
That's true.
Um, One last thing before we go to the question I ask every one of my guests. Did you ever think that um, sorry, getting the right word here. Did you ever think that the fractal vice video would get as much traction as it did?
I had an idea simply because when I watched the video it was inspired by, which was Hand Tool Rescue, where he found an old one to restore it, it just captivated me. I was like, that is so cool. I just have to have it. So 3D printing being something a lot more accessible to people, I wanted to make my own version. I figured maybe other people might want to make their own version. So yeah, it's not surprising that it was popular, and yeah, it was a nice video because I really enjoyed making it, and it seems to have given a lot of people who have then made my design or one of the other ones available a lot of pleasure from building the Vice as well.
Oh, actually, that brings me to another point I wanted to ask you. You are sharing most of your designs. I can't say all because I haven't watched every single one of your videos, but via Onshape, right? Onshape, is that it?
Mhm.
How important is the sharing of designs to you personally?
To me, it's less complicated than it is for other people because I make my money from YouTube, not from selling designs. So my point of view on this is probably biased towards that. I can release anything I design open source for free, and it doesn't matter to me. Like, so there's always kind people who, if they really like it, they'll do a random donation anyway. But even if they don't, that doesn't matter because I make my money from YouTube ads and Patreon. That's how I make a living. So, but it's, becomes a lot harder for other people who are selling designs. Like when I was a teacher, I asked this to teenage students. Like, imagine inventing something revolutionary that would change the world, but then releasing the plans for it so anyone could make it. Like, how could you possibly benefit and profit from your design? And when you explain it like that, the concept seems so alien. But companies like Prusa have shown that you can have a business model where everything is open source if you're doing the other things well, like customer service. People will be loyal to you and you can still be profitable. So yeah, from my perspective, it's easy for me to release everything for free. For other hobbyists, I would hope that a lot of the time they make things open source just so people can remix. But for people trying to design something to be then made, sold commercially, then it becomes a lot harder.
Yep, I do not begrudge anybody who doesn't release their stuff for free. I mean, obviously, everyone has the right to their own intellectual property, but I guess talking to you, I guess it's a little bit simpler to explain. So I was a flat rate mechanic, therefore I was paid by the job, and therefore, if I wanted to cut a whole bunch of corners in the work I did on customers' cars, I could have doubled my yearly salary. So
Mm-hmm.
I always, always, always picked the high road. Always did everything, you know, by the book and gave the best kind of service that I could. So I have the, I let's say, I have the mind that would probably release my world-changing invention for free,
Mm-hmm.
type of thing. And I have been, since I left working at the shop full time, and I've been teaching contracts only. I've been in poor financial shape often enough that I just can't afford, to justify $5 for someone's designs, which makes sense. It's their right to charge for it.
Yep.
So I just went without, and I've always had also the mentality that knowledge, information should be free, and so all those things put together means that every single thing I design, I put online, and I want to contribute back to sort of the community that has given me so much. So that's my line of thinking. But again, I don't, like you, I don't begrudge anybody who chooses to charge for their designs. I just feel it's very important for me when I design stuff. And especially, I'm like you. I'm in a position where I get AdSense money and I get sponsorship money from the actual work getting done, not the final design of the product. So,
Mhm.
it's
Yep.
just the calculation is very easy for me. And I probably, if I somehow trip and fall onto a cure for cancer, you can be guaranteed I'm going to open source that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the nuances people don't realize when people are selling files, it's like a couple of bucks is really cheap for the work they've put in. People look at it as the sum of the parts, like, oh, there's only $2 worth of filament there. But they're forgetting that the person who designed it has probably been working on it for months, printing version after version to get it just right. They forget about the time that's gone into it. They just look at the end result in terms of this many grams of filament, these nuts and bolts, things like that. So maybe if they thought, if I had designed something and spent months and months doing it and I poured my heart and soul into it, how horrible it would be for someone to say, oh, there's only $1 worth of filament. It should be free. Like, people understandably want a return on that investment in a lot of cases.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I'm really glad you brought that up because that is the truth too. I don't know if you get these kinds of emails, but me as a person who designs a lot of circuit boards for YouTube, I often get emails of someone rattling off a list of requirements, and they said, "Can you design this for me? It should only be, you only have 47 components to place on the board. Like it should take you 5 minutes.
Yep.
Please and thank you." So I don't know if you get those requests to design stuff like I do, but yeah, it's true that modeling is a lot of work, and even if it's not a lot of work for the individual design, still the knowledge base that you've built over the years that took work too.
Yeah. I very rarely get requests to design things. For me, it's more help me fix my printer. And
I guess
people
that makes
people don't
sense.
understand that that's not really viable to do over the internet. Like, there's a lot more to it. So on my contact page, I say, please don't email me asking for help. If there's a clear trend in people saying they're having trouble with something, then I can make a video and help as many people that happen to see it, ideally. But yeah, just even things like the person's level of knowledge. You say, okay, they say what's going wrong, so you think, okay, maybe it's this problem. You ask them to test something. They might have no idea what that testing procedure is. They might not have a multimeter or whatever other tools required to do that test. Maybe the way they're describing the problem is inaccurate, so they're going to lead you down the wrong direction when you're diagnosing. It's incredibly hard to do that.
Yeah, yeah, that's actually very true because I deal with that in my professional life. We often get customers saying, "Oh, my, accessory socket, my 12-volt socket in my car doesn't work anymore." And then I say, "Okay, well, start by checking your fuses." And for me and you, checking the fuse, I mean, it's very simple.
Mm.
But for a customer, they're like, "Okay, which fuse?" Because there's like 100 fuses in a car, and I say, "Okay, it's in the under dash fuse box. It's a 10 amp fuse, so you got about 8 of them in there. Just just check them all." And he
Yep.
says, "What? I have to pull out every individual fuse?" And it's like, "Oh, no, no, no. You take a test light, you poke it on, you clip it onto a good ground, and then you just poke both sides of the fuses with your key on." And then they're like, "Oh, I have to go buy a test light." And it's like, "Oh, just if you just would have brought your car, we would have been done already." You know
Yep.
what I mean? Yeah. So I completely understand that. That makes a lot of sense.
Yep. Just going back quickly to releasing things for free, I think, particularly in the 3D printing community, people are really generous. So I spent a lot of time making a calibration website for 3D printers. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but basically it's got a bunch of drop downs. You put in the size of your printer, stuff like that, and it will output a ready to print G code for retraction or first layer or whatever else to the specs you've put in. And I could have charged money for that. I could have put it behind a paywall, but like you, I wanted as many people to benefit as possible. And over time, I found so many people have generously donated. I probably would have made more money from leaving it for free and every 50th person that uses it donating generously versus putting it behind a paywall and hardly anyone using it. So yeah, I think we're fortunate in the space that in the community there's a lot of people with goodwill and they do appreciate the work of others and they're generous in how they communicate that.
That's very true. And I will say also that to me, it means more. When you sell something and someone buys it, for sure they appreciate your work, but they're kind of, you're kind of a provider and they're kind of a customer. But when someone like joins my Patreon, for example, that means a whole lot more to me than someone who's doing, a tit for tat, who's buying something that I'm sending. For some reason, it may be worth less money or maybe worth more money, but it just feels like I don't know, I appreciate it more. I don't know if you feel the same. Do you even have a Patreon?
I do, yeah. I absolutely know what you mean. So if somebody buys something, it's a transactional relationship. Whereas if somebody donates or they're a patron, it's a gesture. And I'm not sure how you run your Patreon, but I try to have perks as a thank you. But I find the vast majority of patrons never really follow that up. Like I put the videos up without ads a day early, and like such a small percentage of my patrons take advantage of that when they can all do it. And I figure it's because they just want to say thank you rather than they want a transaction of something in return. So yeah, it's very humbling, and it's hard to express how much I appreciate how generous people are.
Yeah, I do similar things. I put it up into early access, but I don't put it ad free. And I told my Patreons that because I tend to, once the video is done, like it's just kind of like flushed out of my mind.
Hmm.
And so I will forget to turn ads back on. And
Sure.
so, and then, anyways, there was a time where I was teaching and I was busy and I was stressing about the fact that I wasn't making enough videos. And I went onto Patreon. I made a text post. I told this story before at another podcast,
Hmm.
but I made a text post saying, I apologize, but I've been incredibly busy. I really appreciate you guys' support. So email me if you're unhappy with the fact that you haven't gotten any videos lately, and I'll just refund you. No questions asked. Just say, I want a refund. I will refund you. And the comments on that post where every single one of them were just like, dude, I'm only here to support. I don't care what you post here. And it just felt so good. These people are so kind, in a world that can often be really cruel, especially when you're reading YouTube comments.
Yep.
So yeah, and just a quick note before we move on. I put Michael's Patreon link in the description and the show notes. So if you do have a couple extra bucks to throw his way, I would highly recommend it.
Thanks. Yeah, people
Word.
are incredibly generous, aren't they? And the internet brings out the best and worst of people, and people's generosity to strangers is definitely the best side. How kind people are.
100%. And I find, I don't know if you find the same, but I find the maker community is quite self-supporting. Like
Yep.
we look after each other. Like I have no problem tooting someone's horn. And in fact, I tend to encourage people to make similar videos to me because I still think there's more audience than there is content, at least
Yep.
quality content.
Yeah, because I mean, if you've got a hobby, like for instance, me, Formula One, I don't just watch one Formula One channel or podcast. Like I've got a whole bunch that I like. I have my favorites. So people generally aren't that time poor that they have to be so selective. So the more, the merrier.
100%. And so I actually have a question that I toss to every single one of my guests. Do you mind if I lay it on you right now?
Sure.
So the setup is that you get unlimited funding to start the business of your dreams. Now, it it doesn't have to be profitable because you are getting funded, but it does have to provide a service or a product. What kind of business do you start?
Now that is a good question. Okay, so I probably have three to toss up between. So one side of me is my hobby side. So it would be awesome if I ever won millions of dollars. I'd love to build my own racetrack. So as like a passion, fun project, it would be amazing to set up, build a racetrack and run that as a business, but that's kind of shallow. So the next facet would be from my time as teaching some sort of educational program around technology, because teachers are incredibly time poor. Like it's like I said earlier, it can be a really rewarding job, but I felt like I didn't want to stay in it forever, because as much as you put in, it takes out of you. I felt like the longer I was going to be in teaching, the shorter my life would be, because it was just so exhausting and you just pour so much into it. So to set up something that made teachers' lives easier by supporting them, whether I'm not sure what form that would take, but something that was engaging for students and easy for teachers to deal with, that would be amazing. And the last one, maybe more of a humanitarian thing. So, there's a huge disparity between the wealthy and the poor around the world, within countries, but then also between first world countries to third world countries. So I had this concept for like a house when I was much younger, um, where I have no idea if this is viable, by the way, so it's not tested at all, but it provided water and electricity built into the house, presuming there was enough rainfall. So let's say the water was caught on top of the house, went down into tank storage, normal guttering and things, but then you had an element that was exposed to sunlight where the water would naturally evaporate and travel vertically up to where it would condense into another storage thing on the roof. So step one of that is the water would hopefully, as it evaporates, be purified because the niceties get left behind. And then step two is, now that the water is up high, then as it falls back down, you can get it to turn something to provide a bit of electricity. So it's this kind of all-in-one system for housing that would purify water for places that didn't have clean water and provide a bit of electricity as it trickled down and span whatever. Now, in reality, maybe that's not viable at all. But if you're giving me all the funding in the world, then I reckon you could develop and hire smart enough people to make that work, and you could have a huge impact on people's lives.
Yeah, I mean, that would be an awesome thing to work on. Like I love sustainable energy. Like I have solar panels here that I've
Mm-hmm.
yet to put up because I don't have enough time. But the concept of gathering basically free to you electricity is mind-boggling to me. I love the fact that you just point these panels towards space and then you get electricity out of it. It's pretty incredible. And then you add to that water scarcity. I think it's quite thoughtful of you to want to sort of do good by doing well type thing.
Maybe if that does well enough, I can build the people a racetrack as well, and I can go on it.
Hey, you know what they say? You can sleep in your car, but you can't race your house. So,
That's it. And you only need one kidney too, I'm told. So, you
yep,
know.
yep. That's what the other one's for, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was a great conversation. It was really good talking to you. Thanks so much for taking your time. I'd like to know if you could maybe direct our listeners to one video that you're particularly proud of, something to give them a nice introduction to your channel if they haven't seen you before.
Okay. Well, I have videos. I'd say a lot of my videos will be boring to someone who knows nothing about 3D printing, because there's some specific technical thing how to solve this problem. So probably not one of those. Let me just open and we'll see what's on the list.
Well, I can tell you one of my recommendations while you take a look.
Yep.
There is a video that's not too old, it's about 2 years old, but it's a list of 3D printed tools that you need for your workshop.
Mm-hmm.
And for someone who is familiar with 3D printing, that like person like me, I just went out and downloaded a whole bunch of STLs, so it was awesome. But for someone who isn't familiar with 3D printing, it gives you an idea of what the possibilities are in the 3D printing space. Like, I mean, it's not an exhaustive list
Yep.
because it's impossible to have an exhaustive list in 3D printing, but I think it's a really good video just for people to get an idea of who you are and what your style is.
Mm-hmm. Probably another one similar to that, but not specialized tools, is, I can't find the exact title now to search for it, but I did a video on basically how 3D printing isn't just for trinkets, it's useful. and that covers a wide range of things. That covers how to use 3D printing for your hobbies, how it's used in education, how it can be used. I think there was a section on recycling plastic and then making things out of it. It was just broad ranging in terms of it's not just for printing benches and things to sit on a shelf. Here's all the great things you can do with it. I think it even touched on medical bioprinting of organs and whatever else.
I'll put the link of both those videos in the show notes, but I have the thumbnail stuck in my head. It's like a green train or something.
Yeah, that's exactly the one. Okay, 5 reasons 3D printing is useful. My favorite practical prints. That's the one.
There we go. Excellent. And for everyone else, is there just somewhere you want them to direct you? How about are you on Twitter? Are you on Instagram? Where can we
Uh,
find you?
not on any social media besides YouTube, actually. I mean, I've got a Facebook account that I never post on and I just use for Messenger. I used to be in some Facebook 3D printer groups, but I just constantly got tagged, hey, fix this problem. So I had to leave them. So yeah, just my channel on YouTube. That's the only place you'll really find me.
Sounds good. And I think you have a personal website too.
Yeah, it's the calibration website, so it's all 3D printing related. So there's bits on there to help you calibrate your 3D printer. There's a troubleshooting page, that type of thing. So yeah, for anyone in need of that type of information, yep, it's for you.
And if anyone is just about to install a new 3D printing board into either a printer you've designed or something you are upgrading, I would highly recommend you check out Michael's channel as well, because he's one of the few people that walk you through Marlin clearly, setting up Marlin. So I highly recommend you guys check out his channel. At the very least, go and click one of the links that I put in the description and leave a comment. Comment's good for engagement, but on top of that, as a YouTuber, Michael probably enjoys seeing engagement, and the interesting things you guys post. Just make sure it's nice. Is that right?
Yeah, like we were saying, the community's pretty good overall. Like people nitpick on any YouTube video, they'll agree with 99% of it, but feel the need to comment about the 1% where it could have been done differently. But that's okay. That comes with the territory. And generally, people are very supportive and appreciative. So, yep.
All right. And so I hope you guys will go check them out. And thanks again for your time. And we'll catch you guys in the next episode, hopefully.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
No worries.